I always believed life would greet me with kindness in my later years. After all, I had lived fully, loved deeply, and carved out a little corner of joy for myself. But that evening, standing in the soft glow of my bedroom lamp, I realized how wrong I had been. The quiet words from Alex, my boyfriend of 8 months, still echoed in my mind. "Please, Maya, just tone it down tonight, okay? For me." I turned slowly, watching him hesitate, as if his request weighed more heavily on him than I could have imagined. It wasn't the first time he asked me to temper my personality, but this time it felt different, final. His friend's engagement party was in a few hours, a gathering I had looked forward to for weeks, thinking it might be a chance to finally belong somewhere new. But now the anticipation twisted into dread. I sat on the edge of the bed, the burgundy velvet of my dress catching the light, heavy and warm, almost like a comforting hug. I reached for the framed photo on my nightstand. Me, radiant and laughing at a picnic last summer. The woman in that photo felt like a stranger now. "Why does it matter so much?" I asked softly, more to myself than to Alex, who stood awkwardly near the door. Alex sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how important this crowd is to me. They're polished, successful. You being your usual loud self, it just makes me nervous." I wanted to shout that my laughter had never been a problem before, that I was not a costume to be adjusted for others' comfort. But instead, I nodded. "I'll be quiet," I said, the words tasting bitter. Alex smiled, relief washing over his face. "Thank you." Later, as I prepared to leave, I glanced at the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The deep burgundy dress hugged my figure with an elegance I hadn't worn in years, but my eyes told a different story: uncertainty, fear, and a whisper of defiance. When we arrived at the party, the venue was a grand hall, bathed in crystal light and laughter. Alex squeezed my hand once, whispered, "Remember, stay quiet." I followed him through the crowd, catching snippets of polite greetings, clinking glasses, and forced smiles. Around me, faces I hadn't met yet exchanged subtle glances, their eyes skimming over me like I was an unfamiliar script in a well-rehearsed play. Marcus, the groom-to-be and Alex's best friend, greeted us warmly. "Alex, glad you made it. And you must be Maya." His smile was broad, but eyes carefully measured. "Yes, lovely to meet you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Emma, Marcus's fiancée, stood beside him, graceful, poised, radiating calm. She nodded politely, but there was something in her expression, a faint hesitation, that told me she too might understand the cost of fitting into this world. Alex began to mingle, his charm turning heads effortlessly. I lingered near a table, a glass of wine trembling slightly in my hand, listening to conversations I didn't quite belong to. Minutes stretched into an hour. Every laugh I swallowed, every story I chose not to tell, carved a hollow inside me. I watched Alex sparkle, effortlessly commanding attention, while I became the wallflower he asked me to be. A part of me was shrinking, fading into the shadows where I thought I belonged. I remembered the woman I used to be, outspoken, bold, quick with a joke and an open heart. But tonight, that woman was locked away behind polite smiles and controlled silence. Then, as the evening hummed along, Marcus stood up, glass in hand. "Before we move on, I want to say a few words." A hush fell. I glanced at Alex, whose eyes flicked nervously toward me. Marcus's gaze swept the room, then paused briefly on me. "And Maya, I think you should join me." Confused murmurs rose. I felt Alex's grip tighten on my arm, a silent plea to refuse. But as all eyes turned to me, I found myself rising, stepping toward the center, heart pounding with a mix of fear and something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I cleared my throat, the room quieting around me. "To Marcus and Emma," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "Thank you for letting me share this moment." Faces turned, attentive now. For love to grow, it needs space, not just physical space, but the room to be honest, to be seen, to be loved for exactly who we are, I said, feeling the words rise from somewhere deep within. I spoke of relationships that nurture, that encourage authenticity rather than demand silence. I talked about the courage it takes to be vulnerable and the pain of being told to stay quiet. Alex's expression shifted, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. But the crowd listened, and for once, I wasn't invisible. The night was far from over, but in that moment, standing there in my deep burgundy dress, I reclaimed a piece of myself I thought lost. The woman in the mirror was still there, waiting to be heard. and maybe, just maybe, this toast would be the start of a new chapter. After the toast, I thought the night would change, that something would shift between Alex and me, or between me and his friends. But the next morning, the cold reality settled back in like a familiar fog. Alex was quiet when I saw him, his smile forced and eyes avoiding mine. "You were bold," he said, stirring his coffee with a slight tremble in his fingers. "Maybe too bold." I blinked, trying to keep the hurt from showing. I spoke my truth. He sighed heavily. "You embarrassed me, Maya. You know how important it is to keep the peace with my friends." It was the first time he used the word embarrassed, like a sharp edge slicing through my heart. I wanted to ask why my true self had become a liability, but instead, I nodded silently. I kept thinking about how we got here, how the girl who once laughed without care had become someone who counted syllables in her sentences. At the beginning, everything was effortless. Alex admired my energy and spontaneity. He laughed with me, not at me. I was a burst of color in his carefully painted world. We'd sit on his balcony, sharing stories late into the night. He told me about his childhood, his dreams, his insecurities, and I told him about mine, the career I'd left behind, the family I'd raised on my own, the years I'd spent learning to be independent. Back then, I was Maya, in full bloom. No apologies, no edits. But over time the comments began, small and almost invisible. "Maybe skip the story about your trip to Vegas at dinner," Alex suggested once, eyes darting nervously. "It doesn't really fit here. I'm just telling a story," I protested softly. He shrugged. "I know, but some things don't land well with my friends." Then the eye rolls began. Subtle, but unmistakable. When I laughed too loudly, I caught glances from Sarah and Priya, Alex's closest friends. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes sharp and cool, measured me like an unwelcome guest. I remember one evening, sitting in Alex's living room, feeling like a visitor in a house that should have been my own. Marcus was recounting a business deal, animated and successful. Alex leaned in, nodding eagerly. I tried to join in with a joke about my own career blunders, but the room fell quiet. Sarah raised an eyebrow and exchanged a look with David. Alex gave me a quick glance, a warning. "Maybe, save that one for another time," he murmured. I swallowed hard, retreating into myself. At first I thought I was being sensitive. Maybe I was overreacting. I tried to adjust, to tone down my stories, my laughter, my expressions. "Just try to blend," Alex advised. "You don't have to change who you are, but maybe hold back a little." Hold back? I wondered if that meant holding back me entirely. Then came the invitations that felt like tests rather than celebrations. Dinner parties where I was introduced briefly, then sidelined. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Texts from Alex in the middle of gatherings. "Don't say too much. Please, just smile. Act calm." Each message chipped away at my confidence, at the bright woman I'd been. Alex's friend group was polished and intimidating. Marcus, the successful entrepreneur with a firm handshake and an impeccable suit. Sarah, poised and sharp-tongued beneath her polite smiles. David, always quick with a sarcastic remark, eyes never missing a beat. Priya, the quiet observer who sometimes cast looks of sympathy my way but never intervened. I watched them closely, trying to find my place. But the more I tried, the more I felt like an outsider in a circle that spun without me. One evening, I confided in Alex. "Why do you keep asking me to change? I'm scared I'm losing myself." He looked away, silent. "I want you to fit in," he said finally, voice low. "Fit in or disappear." He didn't answer. At the engagement party, when Alex asked me to stay quiet, I realized this wasn't just about social etiquette, it was a boundary drawn sharply between us. It was a warning and a threat. But beneath the surface of his polished friends, I began to notice cracks. The forced laughter, the whispered gossip, the subtle competition. Emma, the bride-to-be, sometimes looked distant, her smiles tight as if she, too, played a role that wasn't entirely hers. I wondered if she felt the same pressure to conform, to mute parts of herself. That night, standing before them with a glass in hand, I chose to speak, not just to congratulate, but to say what had been building inside me. What I had been told to hide, the cost of silence. Now looking back, I understood that my journey was just beginning. The question wasn't whether I could change for love. It was whether I could love myself enough to refuse. The moment I first stepped into Alex's world, I knew it was unlike anything I had known before. His friends were not just acquaintances, they were a tightly knit group, polished, successful, and I realized quickly, a little intimidating. That night at the engagement party, as I watched them laugh and exchange stories, I felt like I was peering through a glass wall, separated by something invisible yet impenetrable. Marcus, the groom-to-be, was the unofficial leader, tall, confident, with a booming laugh that filled the room. He commanded attention effortlessly. I could see why Alex looked up to him. Marcus had the kind of success that felt tangible. Investments, startups, social influence, all wrapped in an easy charm. Beside him stood Sarah, whose poised smile seemed perfectly calibrated. She welcomed me with a courteous nod, but her eyes held a spark of something I couldn't quite place, a hint of condescension beneath the polished exterior. David was the joker, quick-witted and sharp-tongued, but his jokes sometimes landed with a sting rather than laughter. Priya was quieter, observant, offering occasional smiles but rarely joining the conversation fully. As Alex introduced me, I caught the subtle exchanges, brief glances, polite but cool tones. They were polite, yes, but I was clearly the outsider. Their social circle felt like an exclusive club I had stumbled into uninvited. I tried to blend in, as Alex had requested. I laughed at the right moments, nodded when appropriate, and kept my stories short and safe. But beneath the surface, a tempest brewed. Every gesture I made seemed measured against an invisible checklist I had no access to. At one point, I asked about Marcus and Emma's plans for their wedding. "It's going to be a big event," Marcus said, eyes sparkling with excitement. "We're keeping it classic, but with some modern twists." Sarah chimed in. "We want everything perfect. You only get one shot at this." I smiled and added, "It sounds wonderful. I'm sure it will be beautiful." David laughed lightly. "Well, you wouldn't want any too loud to spoil the vibe, would you?" The words stung, though his tone was casual. I caught Alex's gaze. His expression said, "See, this is why we have to keep things low-key." I spent much of the evening observing. I noticed how seamlessly they navigated conversations about investments, real estate, and career milestones, subjects I had left behind years ago. I watched as they exchanged inside jokes, subtle references to shared histories I was never part of. Alex seemed to morph around them. The easygoing, confident partner I first met turned cautious, careful, almost rehearsed. I realized he was walking a tightrope between two worlds, one with me and one with them. Emma was a mystery to me. She smiled warmly, but seemed reserved, as if she was also performing a role. I caught a moment when she glanced at Alex and then away quickly, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. I wondered if she too felt the pressure to conform, to mute parts of herself. One conversation that evening left an impression. Priya and I found ourselves momentarily alone by the drink table. She looked me over with gentle eyes and said quietly, "It's not always easy, being new to the group." I smiled, surprised by her kindness. "No, it's not. It feels like I'm trying to fit a puzzle piece into the wrong box." She nodded. "Sometimes you just have to find the right place to belong." I wanted to tell her how much that meant, but the moment passed and she was swept away by the others. As the night wore on, the warmth I had hoped to find remained elusive. I watched Alex and his friends laugh, confident and unburdened. I sat quietly, a spectator to a play where I had no script. When Alex came to check on me, his voice was low and strained. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired, I guess." He nodded, but the distance between us felt wider than the room. Later, as we left the party, the cool night air filled my lungs, but the chill inside me lingered. In the car, Alex turned to me. "I know it's hard, but this is their world. You have to be careful." "Careful?" I repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be careful. I want to be myself." He sighed. "I'm trying to protect you." "But from what?" I asked. "From being seen." He didn't answer. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about Priya's words about finding the right place to belong. I realized that perhaps the place I was trying to fit into was never meant for me. The friends, the parties, the polished smiles, they weren't wrong or fake, they just weren't mine. And neither was Alex, if he expected me to be anything less than who I am. The next few weeks passed with a slow, subtle tension, like a string pulled tight but not yet snapping. Alex and I fell into a rhythm again. Brunches, errands, quiet evenings, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Our conversations grew more careful. The laughter we used to share so easily now felt rehearsed, as though joy required a script. Then, One evening over dinner, Alex put his fork down and looked at me with that particular mix of charm and strategy I had come to recognize. Marcus and Emma finally settled on a date, he said, late September. I nodded. That's wonderful. They deserve something beautiful. He leaned forward slightly. They're having a pre-wedding celebration, an engagement party/fundraiser actually. Marcus wants to make it big. I smiled. That sounds like a circus in a good way. Alex laughed, then hesitated. I offered to help plan it. I've been handling a few logistics already. I sipped my wine. Do you need a hand? His eyes flicked up. Actually, yeah. I think it'd be good for you to be involved, help with the decorations, coordinate some of the welcome details. Something in his tone held a question, like he wasn't sure whether to extend the invitation or brace for my answer. I'd love that, I said. He looked relieved. Just keep it tasteful. You know how Emma is. Simple, elegant, not too loud. I folded my napkin slowly. Of course. A few days later, I joined Alex at Marcus and Emma's loft to go over the plans. The space was as curated as their relationship: exposed brick, white furniture, minimalistic art with price tags still hidden beneath the frames. Emma welcomed me politely, but her smile faltered as she handed me a clipboard. We're thinking muted tones: ivory, pale rose, sage green, very natural, very clean. I understand, I said. No sequins, got it. She offered a nervous laugh. I didn't mean. I held up a hand gently. Don't worry, I can do subtle. Alex glanced between us, then said, we're expecting about 75 people. Friends, family, some donors. Maya can handle the welcome table, right? Emma nodded. Yes, and maybe the toasts? Alex froze. Actually, Marcus was going to ask his brother. Emma tilted her head. I thought someone said Maya used to do public speaking? I offered a modest smile. I did. A long time ago. College lectures, community events. Nothing like this. Still, Emma said, wouldn't it be fun to have something heartfelt? Alex cleared his throat. Let's focus on the essentials first. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparations. I arranged calligraphy place cards, ordered cream linen runners, even tracked down a vintage-style guestbook Emma had pinned to her digital vision board. I told myself this was a chance to connect, not just with them, but with some version of myself I hadn't touched in years. Still, each meeting reminded me of the gap between inclusion and acceptance. At one planning session, Sarah arrived late, toting iced coffee and a 1,000-yard stare. Sorry, traffic, she said, sliding into a seat across from me. What'd I miss? I smiled. We were just discussing centerpiece options. She looked at the mock-up I'd arranged, dried lavender with eucalyptus and blush peonies. Pretty, she said with a shrug. Bit much, maybe. Alex jumped in. We'll tone it down. I felt the heat creep into my chest. It's easy to adjust. These are just samples. Sarah smiled. Cool and clipped. Of course. Just want to keep it refined, you know? I knew. I was learning the code. Refined meant quiet, small, restrained. Everything I had been asked to become. A few nights before the party, Alex and I had dinner at his place. He was distracted, scrolling through emails on his phone. Do you think Emma's happy with everything? I asked. He shrugged. She's stressed, but it's coming together. I folded my arms. You've barely looked at me all evening. He set the phone down. Sorry, just trying to make sure everything goes off without a hitch. Am I part of the hitch? I asked softly. He looked up, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, you keep handing me roles, but I don't know where I stand in your life. Am I the girlfriend who helps but never speaks, or someone who actually gets to be herself? Alex looked away. You're reading too much into it. Am I? I asked. You asked me to help, but only within the limits of what won't make you uncomfortable. I'm just trying to avoid drama. And I'm trying not to disappear. He said nothing. The silence was louder than anything either of us could have said. The night before the party, I sat at my vanity brushing through my curls, watching my reflection settle into focus. I had spent weeks shaping myself to fit into Alex's world, and I had done it so well, I barely recognized my own voice anymore. A voice that used to fill auditoriums and classrooms, a voice that once comforted a child through grief and built community from scratch. I touched the fabric of my burgundy dress, the one I had chosen for tomorrow, not pale, not muted, deep and warm, like the woman I still was beneath the quiet. I whispered aloud, let them see me. The morning of the party arrived, wrapped in a strange stillness. I woke early, though I hadn't slept well. The sky outside the bedroom window was still a shade of slate blue, streaked with faint coral light. It was the kind of morning that usually held promise. But today, I sensed it was waiting for something else, for something to break. I moved slowly, with the quiet resolve of someone dressing for battle but refusing to admit it aloud. The burgundy velvet dress, pressed and waiting, hung from the closet door like a question I hadn't yet answered. When I finally stepped into it, it felt heavier than before, though I knew the weight had nothing to do with fabric. Alex was quiet during the drive. He hummed to the radio occasionally, drumming his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, pretending not to notice my silence. I watched the road roll out before us, a long line of asphalt leading straight into someone else's fairy tale. Just before we turned into the venue, he exhaled loudly and said, "Hey, before we walk in." I looked at him, already bracing. "I know this isn't your crowd, and I appreciate everything you've done," he said. His voice was careful, almost too polite, "but maybe today, just try to blend in, please." I stared out the window. He continued, "No pressure or anything. It's not the time for speeches or big stories. Not today." "No stories," I repeated. He nodded. "You know what I mean." "I do." And I did. He wanted me to stay quiet. Again. This time, without even pretending it was for my benefit. This time, it was simply about control. Inside, the venue was stunning. Every detail had been executed precisely. The ivory tablecloths, the pale rose centerpieces, the soft lighting. I caught glimpses of Emma gliding across the room like someone halfway into a dream, lips moving in polite greetings, her smile practiced and restrained. Guests began arriving quickly after. Some I recognized from planning meetings, most I didn't. I stood by the welcome table, checking names, offering programs, answering questions. I smiled when expected, laughed gently when prompted. My voice, when used, stayed in a lower register, carefully measured. "Maya, you look absolutely elegant," Priya said, passing by with a flute of champagne. "Thank you," I replied, resisting the urge to say more. Sarah drifted near the table at one point, scanning the room before looking at me. "You really pulled everything together." I gave a soft nod. "I'm glad it met expectations." She smirked. "You even managed to stay on theme." "Hard to miss when the theme is silence," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyebrows arched slightly, but she walked away without comment. I caught sight of Alex often, smiling, shaking hands, slipping easily into his performance. I wondered how many parts of himself he'd given up for their approval, or if he even noticed anymore. When he looked my way, his smile would tighten. Not fondness, not pride, more like a warning to hold the line. Around noon, Emma tapped her glass gently with a fork. The room quieted. "I know we'll have toasts a bit later," she said with a shy smile. "But I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. This day, it means everything to us." There was scattered applause. Marcus leaned in to whisper something to her, and for the first time, she looked genuinely happy. Alex slipped beside me shortly after. "Doing okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. He looked around. "Remember what we talked about?" "Yes, Alex, I remember." The breaking point came in the garden, just outside the reception hall. I had stepped away for a moment to breathe. The crowd had thickened, and the low buzz of laughter and clinking glasses had begun to pulse in my ears. I stood near a hedge of trimmed boxwood, looking out at the small fountain in the center. The water burbled softly. I let my eyes rest on it. Footsteps approached behind me. "Maya," Alex said. His voice was too soft, too measured. I didn't turn. "I just wanted to check in. You disappeared. I needed air." He hesitated. "You're not upset, are you?" I turned to face him. "You've told me, more than once, that my presence should be quiet, so I'm trying to honor that." He sighed. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is, and you don't have to apologize for it, but at least call it what it is." His shoulders stiffened. "You're making this about you again." I tilted my head. Is it so wrong to want to be seen, to be heard? He crossed his arms. "This isn't the time." I nodded slowly. "You're right, but the time's coming." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Maybe fear, maybe guilt, maybe nothing at all. "I'll be inside," he said quietly. He left without waiting for a reply. I stayed in the garden a few more minutes, listening to the water, letting the moment settle. The The truth had been simmering for weeks. Today, it finally touched the surface. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew I couldn't pretend much longer. The sun had shifted by the time I returned inside. The main hall glowed with the soft amber of late afternoon light, filtering through the tall arched windows, casting elongated shadows across the parquet floors. Everything looked golden. The tablecloths, the champagne, the curated smiles. It was the kind of beauty that didn't invite warmth, only admiration from a distance. I took my place at the side of the room near the main seating area, where the welcome table had been folded away and replaced with highball glasses and imported cheese. My job, apparently, was complete. Now I was expected to blend in, preferably without making a sound. Alex was across the room, laughing with Marcus and David, holding a half-full drink. He looked relaxed, confident. There were no glances in my direction. I could have been a stranger in that crowd, and no one would have known the difference. I walked slowly toward the bar, nodding politely to a few faces I'd met during planning. One woman smiled at me like she couldn't quite place me. Another gave me a cursory once-over and returned to her conversation. I ordered a glass of seltzer and took it to a small cocktail table tucked against the far wall. From there, I could see everything and remain seen by no one. The music hummed in the background, elegant jazz, just loud enough to keep voices soft. The guests flowed around me like a well-rehearsed ballet. Touches on arms, light laughter, shared glances, it all looked effortless. I knew how much work it took to make anything appear that seamless. I watched Emma move between groups with a hostess's smile, warm, controlled, always appropriate. She greeted people with two-handed handshakes, tilted her head just enough to appear engaged, and laughed in tiny bursts no louder than a whisper. She looked exquisite. She also looked exhausted. Marcus was in his element. His voice carried even through the music. He slapped backs, raised his glass, repeated the same story about how he proposed at least 3 times to 3 different groups. Each version had the same dramatic pause and punchline. I admired the craft even as I saw through it. "Excuse me," someone said softly behind me. I turned to see Priya. "May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Of course." She lowered herself gently, smoothing the fabric of her emerald green dress. We sat for a moment in silence, the buzz of the party continuing around us. "You look restrained," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "I suppose I am." "You shouldn't be," she said without looking at me, "but I know why you are." I studied her profile, composed, calm. "And why is that?" "Because this room doesn't make space for people who aren't part of the script." I sipped my drink. "And what happens when someone goes off script?" "They get rewritten or replaced." I turned fully toward her. "Do you feel like you're in the right story?" She exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. "I've stopped trying to be a character. Now I just watch the play." She glanced at me then. "But you're not meant to be a spectator." Before I could answer, a loud clinking of silverware against glass broke the moment. Marcus was standing near the center, arm raised, calling for attention. Priya smiled apologetically and rose. "Back to the ballet," she said. The speeches began shortly after. Marcus went first, of course. His toast was smooth, filled with platitudes and curated affection. Emma followed, speaking softly, thanking everyone for their support. Her voice trembled only once, and no one seemed to notice except me. Alex spoke next. He didn't look at me once. He talked about friendship, loyalty, building futures, all words that sounded good from a podium but felt hollow without context. As applause echoed around the room, I remained seated. I clapped politely, my smile practiced. A guest at a nearby table leaned toward me and said, "Are you Emma's aunt?" I shook my head. "No, just a helper." "Oh," she said, turning away with mild disinterest. It was a strange thing to realize how easily we disappear when people decide we're not central to their narrative. I had spent most of my life filling rooms, not fading into their wallpaper. And yet here I was, tucked into a corner in a dress that felt heavier by the minute. After the speeches, Emma approached me quietly. "Thank you," she said. I looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For everything. You made this beautiful." I gave a small smile. I was glad to help. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "And I'm sorry if it ever felt like you weren't seen." That caught me off guard. I studied her face. Her eyes were tired, but sincere. "I think we both know what it's like to be asked to dim our light," she added. I said nothing, but something softened inside me. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze and returned to her guests. I watched the rest of the party from that same seat. People came and went. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. Music played. But none of it touched me. Somewhere deep inside, a choice was forming. One I had spent too long avoiding. It wasn't just about Alex. It wasn't even about this night. It was about all the ways I had made myself smaller and whether I could forgive myself for it. The room didn't grow colder. I did. Or maybe, finally, I was just becoming clear. It's a peculiar thing to be so thoroughly invisible in a room full of people you helped bring together. I sat at the same table long after the applause faded and the toasts gave way to shallow chatter. My glass of seltzer had gone flat. I hadn't taken more than a sip. For a time, I watched without judgment. Simply watched. That's the gift of being ignored. You become a mirror, reflecting truths others don't realize they've laid bare. Sarah was by the bar, recounting a story I'd already heard twice, punctuating each line with an overloud laugh. Priya stood nearby, nodding politely, her posture rigid, one heel bouncing lightly. David was charming a new couple with a wine anecdote he had clearly rehearsed. From my vantage point, the entire social performance began to unravel. The politeness was too polished, the laughter too practiced, the words filled the air like background music, pleasant, forgettable, and hollow. I looked toward Alex. He stood with Marcus, their heads bent together in quiet conversation, their gestures tight and controlled. Occasionally, they'd both glance around, scanning the crowd like hosts, making sure no one had wandered off script. And I understood, then, what had been bothering me for weeks. Alex didn't just want me to be quieter. He wanted me to be edited, rounded out, trimmed, smoothed into something that wouldn't interrupt the image he wanted to belong to. A woman like me, a woman who had survived loss, hardship, reinvention, carried too much texture. The realization didn't hurt the way I thought it might. It didn't crush me. Instead, it clarified things. I looked around again, this time not as someone seeking entry, but as someone assessing the terrain. Emma passed by on her way to refill her glass. Our eyes met briefly. There was something raw behind her smile. Exhaustion, maybe, or something deeper. I gave her a slight nod. She returned it, then moved on. From across the room, Priya approached slowly, holding a glass of white wine. She didn't sit this time. She stood beside me and looked out at the crowd like we were on the same shoreline, watching a tide neither of us trusted. "I always wonder," she said, "how long you have to know someone before you see who they really are." I answered without turning my head. "I think you only have to be quiet long enough to hear who they think you're not." She looked down at me, one brow lifting. "That's a little bleak." "It's accurate." She smiled faintly. "You're sharper than they give you credit for. They only notice sharp things when they get cut." Priya's smile faded. She glanced toward the corner where Sarah and David had drifted. "They think you're just the nice girlfriend Alex keeps in the background," she said quietly. I looked up. "And what do you think?" "I think you're waiting." "For what?" "To decide if you're going to burn it down, or just walk away." Her words settled into the space between us like smoke. Then she walked off, without another word. It was nearing sunset now. The room had warmed with the closeness of people, perfume, wine, ambition. Somewhere in the far corner, Emma had taken a seat beside an elderly woman I assumed was a relative. Her posture had softened. She wasn't smiling. I rose from my table, careful not to draw attention. My feet ached, and the velvet dress clung a little heavier to my frame now that the temperature had risen. I wandered through the edges of the room, a satellite no one noticed orbiting their perfect center. I stopped briefly at the gift table, admiring the handwriting on the envelopes. At the back exit, I opened the door and stepped out for air again, but this time only for a moment. The sky had turned a deep lavender. Somewhere, far from all this, real life was happening. Kids running through sprinklers, neighbors arguing over hedges, someone falling in love in a quiet bookstore. And I was here, in a hall filled with glass and silence. I turned back inside and closed the door behind me. Back near the entrance, I saw something that made me pause. Emma had stepped away from the crowd again. She stood at a small corner table, rearranging the placement cards that had been left behind. I approached carefully. "Need a hand?" I asked. She looked up, surprised but not unkindly. It helps to have something to do with my hands." I stood beside her. We worked in silence for a few moments. Then she said, without looking at me, "Do you ever feel like you're hosting a party for people who don't actually like you?" I paused. Yes. She smiled weakly. Marcus means well. But sometimes I feel like I'm part of a brand, not a relationship. I looked at her face, the makeup still flawless, but her eyes tired. Do they ever see you? I asked gently. She shook her head. Only when I reflect what they want. We said nothing else. The quiet between us said enough. Back at my original table, I sat down once more, but this time, I didn't try to disappear. I sat upright. I looked directly at people when they passed. I made no effort to appear occupied or in need of distraction. And as I did, I felt something settle into place, not comfort, not quite courage, but certainty. I didn't belong in this world because it wasn't built to hold someone like me. That didn't mean I needed to vanish, it meant I needed to stop asking permission to exist inside it. Whatever happened next, I would not fold in on myself again. Not for Alex. Not for anyone. The party had crested by the time the music softened, and the crowd began shifting toward the dessert stations. Champagne flutes were half empty on the tables, and the scent of vanilla and rosewater mingled with the perfume of mingling guests. People relaxed now, ties loosened, shoes discreetly removed beneath chairs, the earlier stiffness giving way to an easier kind of post-speech buzz. I had remained seated, no longer trying to blend in, simply allowing myself to exist without apology. My fingers toyed with the corner of a linen napkin, the fabric cool and crisp under my hand. Across the room, Alex was laughing again, a private sort of laugh that he hadn't shared with me in weeks. Priya stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him with an unreadable expression. Then Marcus's voice boomed across the room, interrupting the low din of conversations. "Folks, can I steal your attention one more time?" he called out, tapping a spoon against his glass with theatrical flair. "I know we've had our official toasts, but I thought it'd be fun to open the mic for anyone who wants to say a few words about love. Spontaneous, unrehearsed. The floor is yours." There was polite laughter. A few guests looked at one another, shaking their heads or shrugging. A man near the back raised a glass and offered a joke toast that earned scattered chuckles. And then Marcus looked at me. "Maya," he said, pointing in my direction with a warm grin, "I heard you've got a way with words. Why don't you give us something from the heart?" Every head turned. I felt it before I saw it, the subtle ripple in the room, as faces pivoted, eyes searching. Then came the real moment. Alex, frozen mid-laugh, catching Marcus's words just as they landed. He turned slowly, his smile fading like a theater curtain falling between acts. "Maya," Marcus said again, "just a few words." I saw Alex shake his head once, small, sharp. His lips didn't move, but his meaning was as clear as if he'd shouted, "Don't." And in that pause, I understood what stood between me and the microphone wasn't just a few feet of polished floor. It was a choice. I rose slowly, not dramatically, just deliberately. The room didn't fall silent, but a hush came over it, like something real was about to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. I passed Alex as I walked. He didn't speak. He didn't touch my arm or block my path, but his eyes followed me like a storm cloud about to split open. Marcus gestured with both hands. Everyone, the incomparable Maya. I stepped up to the small podium. No script, no notes, just breath and history. The microphone felt familiar beneath my hand, a shape I hadn't touched in years, but still remembered how to hold. I cleared my throat gently. "I wasn't expecting this," I began, and the crowd gave a soft, courteous laugh. "I was told, more than once, to keep things simple tonight, to not make a scene, but I've come to believe that sometimes, not speaking is the loudest scene of all." The room stilled. I scanned the faces, Emma watching me intently from her chair, Priya folding her arms slowly as if bracing herself, David tilting his head with curiosity. Sarah looked bored already, but Alex, he looked furious, not wildly, visibly angry. No, his was a quiet rage, the kind that only shows in the corners of the mouth, in the rigid spine, in the unblinking stare of someone who feels control slipping through their fingers. I turned back to the microphone. "When I was younger," I continued, "I thought love was about compromise, about learning to bend for the people we care about. And that's true, to a point. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that bending meant becoming invisible, that love was proven by silence." I paused to let the words settle. Several people sat straighter. One woman I didn't know nodded slowly, almost to herself. "But real love, the lasting kind, the good kind, doesn't ask us to shrink. It doesn't hand us a script and expect us to read quietly from the wings while someone else takes the spotlight." A soft murmur moved through the room. Real love, I said, voice steady, invites us on stage, hands us a mic, and listens. No applause. Not yet. Just breath held. And if you find yourself constantly editing who you are just to stay loved, that's not love, that's fear in formal wear. Emma covered her mouth, a quick motion, either to hide a smile or a tear. I wasn't sure. I lowered the mic slightly. So tonight, to Marcus and Emma, I wish you a love that sees you, all of you, even the loud parts, especially the loud parts. Now the applause came, slow, then steady, then full. I stepped back, bowed my head once, and walked away from the podium. I didn't look at Alex. He didn't speak. The air changed when I stepped down from the podium. It wasn't louder or quieter, just different, like the whole room had exhaled and didn't quite know how to inhale again. My heels clicked softly against the wooden floor as I walked back to my seat, though every step felt heavier than the last. I didn't look for Alex. Not yet. I sat down slowly, resting my hands on the table, feeling the eyes. Some were curious, some approving, a few cold, but none of it unnerved me. Not now, not after what I'd said. I had spoken without rehearsing, without seeking permission, without measuring each word for palatability. And it hadn't broken me. It had released something I didn't know was still trapped inside, the voice I thought I'd traded away for companionship, safety, belonging. A server approached to refill my glass, and I thanked him gently, watching the bubbles rise in my fresh seltzer. The taste of stillness lingered more than the drink itself. Then Alex appeared. He stood beside the table, hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored navy slacks. His face was carefully neutral, but I saw it. The tightness at the corner of his mouth, the crease between his brows he didn't yet realize had formed. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, and placed it down with quiet deliberation. "I think you've made your point," he added, when I said nothing. I looked up at him. "No, I finally made mine." His jaw twitched. "That wasn't the time or the place, Maya." "I disagree." He shifted his weight, glancing quickly around the room before refocusing on me. "You embarrassed me." I didn't blink. I liberated myself. We stepped out to the side terrace, the same one where I'd stood alone earlier, watching the garden fountain. Now the sky was darker, a soft indigo haze settling above the tree line. The lanterns along the patio flickered gently, casting a low golden light. Alex rubbed his temple, frustration simmering just beneath his polished surface. "You could have pulled me aside," he said. "We could have had a conversation. But no, you had to go public." I folded my arms. "You mean I had to speak without you controlling how I did it?" "That's not what I meant." "But that's what you've been doing for months." His silence confirmed it more than words ever could. I continued, voice steady. "From the first time you told me to tone it down, I thought you were trying to help. I believed that shrinking would make me easier to love. But love doesn't ask for that, Alex. Editing isn't affection." He looked at me sharply. "I never asked you to change who you were." "No, you asked me to hide it." He stepped back, folding his arms. "So what now? You want to make a scene? End it right here in front of everyone?" "No," I said. "The scene ended the moment I chose to speak. What happens next depends on what you do with the truth I offered." He ran a hand down his face. "You made this about you." "No," I replied. I finally included myself. We stood there for a long moment, the kind that feels like a ledge. I knew then, we had come to a crossing, not an argument, not even a fight, just a point of no return. "I care about you, Maya," he said, "but I need things to be composed, predictable. And I need to be whole," I said. He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. We both knew it. There was nothing more to negotiate. "I'll send for your things," he said, quietly, like a man announcing the end of a contract. I nodded. "I'll be home tomorrow." He walked away without another word. His shoes echoed against the stone of the terrace, a sound too sharp for a night so quiet. I remained outside for a while longer, the wind brushing against my cheeks. I let myself feel it all, the sadness, the release, the ache, the strange lightness in my chest. This wasn't grief. It was clarity. Later, I returned inside. The party had moved into its late stages, laughter louder, posture looser. Some guests had gone. Others were too engrossed in stories or second drinks to notice my reappearance. But Emma noticed. She approached me with a small smile, Her hands were clasped in front of her, her posture careful. "You were incredible," she said softly. I shook my head. I was just honest. "That's more rare than incredible," she replied. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She lowered her voice. "Marcus doesn't know I've been having doubts. He's a good man, but he's a big idea of a person. I've spent so much time trying to fit the shape he made for us." I looked at her gently. "Then maybe it's time to reshape it." Emma's eyes glistened for a moment. "Your words tonight, they didn't just land with him." I placed my hand lightly over hers. "You still have your voice, Emma. Use it." She nodded, the muscles in her jaw tightening like someone preparing for a choice. "Not tonight, but soon." As I prepared to leave, I paused by the mirror in the hallway leading to the coat room. The reflection surprised me. Not because of the dress, it still fit as it had. Not because of the face, older, yes, but familiar. It was the eyes. They weren't tired anymore. They weren't seeking permission. They were mine again. I stood by the mirror in the hallway a moment longer, letting the hum of the party behind me settle into something distant. My reflection, still framed by soft amber light, showed not a woman transformed, but one reclaimed. I reached up, gently tucking a curl behind my ear. My fingers brushed my temple warm skin, steady pulse. A woman returned to herself. Then, without drama, I stepped away and walked back toward the ballroom, crossing the threshold like someone who had never been excluded in the first place. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The speeches had faded into memory, and the band had resumed its soft jazz. Guests mingled between half-eaten desserts and refilled glasses. There was a low, mingled hum of conversation that suggested the night was approaching its final arc. Comfortable, celebratory, a little tipsy. But beneath it, something else stirred. I could feel it, a murmur that followed me as I passed. "That's her. She's the one who spoke." She said that line. What was it? "Real love invites you on stage." I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. I let the words pass over me like wind through open windows. At the edge of the room, Emma sat beside an older woman I now recognized as her grandmother. Her face, usually composed, was unusually relaxed, as if some small part of her armor had been quietly dismantled. When she caught sight of me, she lifted her glass slightly. I mirrored the motion. Just as I was preparing to slip toward the far end of the room and quietly collect my coat, Marcus stepped in front of me. "Maya," he said, his voice still full of the same performative warmth I'd come to expect, "you nearly stole the show." I offered him a faint smile. Wasn't trying to, just needed to stop hiding. He laughed, not quite knowing what to do with the answer. "Well, I was wondering if you're up for it. Would you do another toast?" he asked, holding his glass loosely in one hand. "Something about second chances. Emma and I were talking. We feel like this moment deserves another voice." I tilted my head. "Is that what Emma wants?" He hesitated. "She said she trusts your words." That stopped me. I nodded once. "Then I'll speak." They handed me the mic again. No introduction this time. Just the quiet shifting of bodies turning toward the woman in the burgundy dress. I waited for silence, not forced, just real silence, the kind that comes when people are truly listening. Then I spoke. "Earlier this evening, I said something about love, not asking us to shrink. I meant it, but there's more." I paused, not for effect, but to find my footing. "We talk about love as if it's a clean thing, polished, predictable, but real love?" I shook my head gently. "It's anything but." The room held still. Real love is messy. It forgets anniversaries. It loses its temper. It learns to say sorry in a dozen different languages before it finally means it. I glanced toward Emma, then toward no one. It isn't just candlelight and shared jokes. It's the hard conversations at 1 a.m., the ugly cries on bathroom floors, the long silences where no one knows what to say. A breath caught in someone's throat nearby. I heard it, but didn't stop. Real love doesn't always feel good, but it makes room for the whole person, not just the easy parts. There was no script in my hand, no approval to chase. I kept going. It's asking someone day after day, "Can I meet you where you are?" Even when where they are doesn't match where you thought you'd be. I let the silence stretch again. The tension now wasn't discomfort, it was reverence. I've spent too long thinking I had to be small to be loved. And I've watched too many women, too many people do the same. We hide the pieces that feel too loud, too complicated, too bruised. I met no one's eyes, and everyone. But love, if it's honest, doesn't want the edited version. It wants the rough draft, the side notes, the margin scribbles. A few guests were still now. No shifting, no sipping, just presence. And when we find someone who can hold all that and still say, I see you, then we've found something rare, something worth standing up for, even if our voice shakes. I stopped. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I simply handed the microphone to the next waiting hand and walked back into myself. People stood. Some clapped. Others didn't move at all. I wasn't watching. I stepped outside again, this time into the cool night fully. The air was different now, brisk, almost electric. A breeze moved through the trees, lifting the hem of my dress gently, as if the world had finally taken notice of the woman who refused to stay quiet. The next morning, I woke to silence. Not the empty kind that follows absence, but the grounded quiet of a house holding its breath in peace. No notifications, no missed calls. The usual buzz from Alex's messages or Priya's calendar invites had stopped completely. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my robe, staring out the window as the soft morning light moved across the hardwood floor. The burgundy dress hung over the back of a chair where I'd draped it the night before. It looked different now, less ceremonial, more like a banner I'd carried into battle. I brewed coffee slowly. My hands moved without rush, without instruction. The mug felt warm and familiar against my palms, grounding me in the smallest of comforts. I didn't need to rehash the night. I didn't need to argue with myself or justify anything. I knew what I'd said, and I knew why I said it. At precisely 8:37, the first message came. It wasn't from Alex, it was from Priya. What you did last night made people see themselves. Thank you for not letting us stay asleep. A few minutes later, another message. Maya, I don't know you, but I was at the party. Your words, thank you. Unsigned, just a phone number. Then a third, from someone named Evelyn. I cried listening to you. I'm 63 and still learning how to take up space. Please don't stop speaking. I leaned back into my kitchen chair, letting the words come as they may. I wasn't looking for recognition, but something about knowing the truth had moved beyond the confines of the party. It mattered. By noon, I'd received a dozen messages, most from women I didn't know. Women who'd watched me speak and heard more than a toast. They'd heard permission. At 2:14, Emma called. I picked up on the second ring. Hi, she said, her voice soft. Hi, I replied. I just wanted to hear your voice again. Last night, it still echoes. I waited. Marcus and I had a long talk, she continued. I told him I wasn't sure we should get married yet. My breath caught, but I said nothing. He was upset, of course, said I was being dramatic, that the party had just stirred things up, but I told him that maybe it didn't stir them up. Maybe it revealed what I'd been pretending not to feel. I closed my eyes. How did he take that? He didn't slam a door, she said, half laughing, but he left for his brother's place. And how do you feel? She was quiet, then terrified, and freer than I've felt in a long time. I smiled into the receiver. That's how you know it's real. Growth and fear, they travel together. I wanted you to know, she added. Whatever happens next, I'll never forget what you gave me. You already had it, I said. I just reminded you it was still yours. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from Alex. His voice was calm, not angry, but heavy. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. I realize now, I wanted a version of love I could manage, not one I could grow with. That wasn't fair to you. There was a long pause. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted to tell you, I hear you now. I don't know what that means for us, but thank you for saying it anyway. He didn't ask to see me. He didn't try to reverse anything. And somehow, that made it easier to forgive him. I spent the evening in my reading chair, wrapped in a light shawl, the burgundy dress folded gently across my lap like a memory made tangible. I hadn't changed the locks. I hadn't burned bridges, but something fundamental had shifted. I no longer lived waiting for someone else's approval. I no longer rehearsed silence. The world hadn't cracked open, but I had. And through that crack, light had come in. The next day, I visited the bookstore downtown. It was an old place with creaky floorboards and handwritten signs. I wandered to the poetry section and let my fingers trail across spines. Adrienne Rich, Audre Lorde, Rilke. I pulled a slim volume from the shelf and held it in my hands. The title was embossed in gold. The voice that returned. I bought it without hesitation. On the way out, I passed a woman with gray streaks in her braid and a tired but alert face. She looked at me, paused, and said, "Were you the one at the Larchwood party?" I blinked. "Yes." She nodded. "My daughter sent me a clip. She's 22. Said it was the first time she believed a woman over 50 had something powerful to say that wasn't sugar-coated." I smiled. "Tell her it took me decades to stop sweetening the truth." She chuckled. "Well, you made the truth taste strong enough." We parted ways, but the weight of what she'd said stayed with me. That night, I took the burgundy dress out of the garment bag and hung it in my closet, not hidden away, not dry cleaned and sealed, just there, a part of my wardrobe, not a costume, not a relic. A garment worn during a return. A week after the party, I stood at the edge of the community center auditorium, watching folding chairs being arranged in imperfect rows. A stack of pamphlets sat on a plastic table to my right, their covers bearing the words "Women's Voices, Finding Power at Any Age." The room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon-scented floor cleaner. It had taken me only 3 days after the toast to reach out to the coordinator. I'd asked if they had room for a new speaker in their ongoing series on reinvention. She said no one had asked to speak from the perspective of a woman over 70. Not once. "You're sure there'll be an audience for this?" I had asked. She'd laughed. "Maya, women don't stop needing permission to speak just because they've passed 50. If anything, they need it more." Now, watching the rows fill slowly with women, some in their 30s, others silver-haired and quietly observant, I felt something I hadn't in years. Needed. Not for child-rearing, not for errands, not for emotional labor, but for presence, for words. Priya had helped with the flyer design. Emma had forwarded the event to half her book club. I even received a brief email from Evelyn, the woman who'd messaged me days before. "You reminded me, I still get to change. I'll be in the front row." I smoothed the velvet of my dress, my fingers pausing over the subtle creases. I hadn't meant to wear it again, but when I opened the closet that morning, it was the only thing that felt honest. The dress wasn't just what I wore when I found my voice. It was part of the voice itself. At exactly 6 o'clock, the hum of the room softened. I stepped onto the modest riser stage, placed one hand on the podium, and breathed in. Not to steady myself, but to feel the moment. "Good evening," I said into the microphone. My voice echoed lightly, not too loud, not too soft, just mine. "My name is Maya. I'm 71, and for much of my life, I was taught to believe that wisdom grows quietly, that strength whispers, and that aging should come with a soft erasure of self." I looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some cautious, a few already nodding. "But that's not how it's worked for me," I continued, "because somewhere between losing the people I loved and learning how to survive the silences I was handed, I realized something vital: my voice doesn't expire." A few murmurs of affirmation drifted back. "I'm not here to give advice," I added. "I'm here to remember out loud, and maybe, if it helps, to remind you that being seen is not a reward, it's a right." I spoke for 20 minutes, about Alex, without naming him, about being asked to tone down, about all the tiny ways women, especially older women, are softened until they vanish. I told the story of the party, of the toast, of the moment I chose to speak, not to impress, not to defend, but simply to exist in full. By the end, I wasn't trembling. I was glowing. And the applause wasn't deafening. It was sustained, real. Women clapping with open palms, not just for what I'd said, but for recognizing themselves in the telling. Afterwards, a line formed. Some wanted to shake my hand, some only nodded, eyes wet but grateful. A few stayed behind, pulling chairs into small circles to talk among themselves, the way women do when the pretense fades and honesty takes its place. As I gathered my notes, I felt someone step beside me. I turned. Emma. She looked brighter than she had the night of her engagement party. Her smile reached her eyes now. "Still writing new chapters?" she asked. "Trying," I replied. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded card. "I'm not marrying Marcus." I raised my eyebrows. I told him the truth. He listened. Then we agreed the wedding wasn't right. Not now, maybe not ever. "And how do you feel?" She smiled softly, like I'm finally the one choosing my life. I placed a hand on hers. "Then that's the start of something." She nodded. "Thank you for the spark." I shook my head. "You were already on fire. I just reminded you." That night, I returned home to the quiet house and left the lights off for a while. I poured myself a cup of tea, set it on the windowsill, and let the street lamps bathe the kitchen in soft gold. The velvet dress still hugged my frame, and I let it. I wore it like skin, not armor. For a long time, I had believed my best offerings were behind me. That love, romantic, familial, even self-love belonged more to the young. But now I knew something deeper. Love grows differently when you speak from wholeness. And voice doesn't age. It settles. It roots. It deepens. And when it finally rises again, it doesn't ask for a spotlight. It simply arrives,